Right. I had an incredible response to last week's message. And the interesting thing was that people asked us if we could provide them with the overheads or the screenshots that we used. There was a fairly intense discussion between a couple of board members, and so we only used generic ones last week that didn't belong to anyone. But I have, as I've told you last week and time again, I've been a devotee of Chuck Missler from 1995, and he would be the first person to come up and hit me and say, "Don't say that, because you know me, I go out on a limb and I'm controversial and everything." But what he did with me and my wife in 1995, he infused us with such a love for the Word of God that we've been red hot ever since. And so Eric sent an email to Koinonia House, which is Chuck's organisation, and he died in 2016. And Ron Matson is his son-in-law, and they actually gave us the permission to distribute to you guys, if you want them, the overheads. I think there's about maybe 15 or 20. But they give a very, very comprehensive look and a correct look at this particular two chapters in the Old Testament, Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so what I think we're going to do, if this is correct, is put it as a PDF on the chat, on the general chat, and you'll be, if you want to, you can download it and print them off, because they have along the bottom of each one an attribution towards Koinonia House. And we thank them very, very much for their generosity for allowing us to do this. And just to get you back into the swing of things, I'm going to show you just a couple to jog your memory, to let you know where we're going in this. And that heading there, if you can go back just quickly, guys, that one there. I have listened to this particular teaching from so many different teachers, and none of them, to my memory, have ever told me how we ended up in a 10-region, 10-king world government as described in Daniel 7 and Daniel 11. And I'm going to tell you how it happened today, because when I was doing Ezekiel 39 back in the 90s with Chuck, it just all fell into place. But for people who weren't here last week, we're going to put up just a few to let you know who and where this whole thing takes place. And the first one, of course, is the outline of, and that was the birth, this war is the birth of the Antichrist. Do you understand? This chapter that describes what God does in response to this invasion of Israel is the pathway for the Antichrist to be revealed to the world. And I want to, for those who, I don't know, Stella said she was going to have some friends coming in from, did any of them, where's Stella? Yeah, all right, okay. Welcome to your friends there. Stella actually came to us because I think last year I was doing a lot of teaching in Paleo Hebrew and that sort of thing, and that dragged her in. So my wife and I have been associated with Morris Zephyr for 27 years. My wife was in Russia working with the Jewish Agency. We have more exposure to the Jewish community here in Perth than a lot of people. And when we first started in 1997 at Morris Zephyr, we had 14 Holocaust survivors as residents in the home, and a lot of them were still in the hostel. And what we learnt from them is absolutely amazing. And one particular lady, and I've told you this before, and I haven't got the photo of Sue and her before, but one of the ladies, and I'm not going to name her because she's passed on, but she was in Greece, born on the Isle of Rhodes, betrayed by her Greek neighbours when the Gestapo came over in 1944, June 1944, and they said 50 drachma for every Jew that you give to us. And so this lady and her sisters were arrested, taken to Athens, put on a train, and taken to Auschwitz. And this lady is amazing because she survived the gas chamber at Auschwitz 3 times. 3 times. And it was such an amazing testimony that Steven Spielberg flew from America to South Africa where she was living, and he videotaped her testimony. He does this all around the world. He's done testimony after testimony after testimony. And so what we learnt from her is amazing. And one of the first things that she said to my wife when they met first in 1997, and she warmed to my wife, and a lot of people do, especially the Jewish people. There's a connection there. She was a pro-Israel, pro-Jewish person from 5. She kept bugging her parents saying, why did we let the Holocaust happen? This was at 5. And so anyway, one of the things that this lady said to my wife after 6-8 months of meeting her daily in the hostel, she said, Sue, a Jew can only trust a Jew, all right? Because all of their neighbours had sold them down the river and sold them into Auschwitz. Her sisters died in the first exposure. And anyway, 5 years later, constantly working with this lady and all of the other people in the home, particularly in the hostel, Sue was leaving her shift one day, and the ladies always used to congregate around the door. They wanted to see who's coming in and one who's going out, all right? They had to be in control of the whole situation. And this lady was particularly deaf. And as Sue went up and said goodbye to all of them and that sort of thing, and she walked out through the automatic doors, and they're slow to close. And because this lady is partially deaf, you know, they speak very loudly. And after 5 years, that lady pointed to Sue walking to the car park and said to the other ladies, she said, that one you can trust. And that has been the basis of her relationship with the Jewish people at Morris Effort for 27 years. And we've learnt so much. So I'm going to go through just a handful of these overheads, and you'll be able to get the whole lot if you want to download them from the general chat, Calvary Chapel Telegram channel. And so this is the outline of Ezekiel. And one thing you need to know is this is virtually the history of Israel from the calling of Ezekiel in the 6th century BC. He was one of the exiles sent to Babylon, and he was there alongside Daniel, the 2 prophets there in exile. And so the first 3 chapters are the call of the prophet. 4 to 14 was God's judgment on Jerusalem. And you'll notice that because in chapters 8, 9 and 10, you see the glory of God leaving in stages of the glory of God from the mercy seat between the seraphim. And so the problem was such that God had noticed that the women in Jerusalem were in the temple daily, and they were mourning for Tammuz. You know who Tammuz is? He's the son of Semiramis and Nimrod, okay? and the elders of the city were in the temple with their face back to the holy place, and they were worshipping the sun. So that's why God just got a little bit ticked off with them and left. So that was the judgment on Jerusalem. Then the judgment of the nations in and around them. And they became Muslim nations because, Muhammad didn't start his gig till the 7th century. And so they became the Muslim nations around them. 33 to 48 is the restoration of the Jews, and that's when Theodor Herzl, I think he was Swiss, and he was a journalist, and he was covering the Dreyfus affair when this Jewish officer was being court-martialed in the French army for a terrible thing that a general had done. So a general couldn't get charged with anything, so they picked on poor Dreyfus. And Theodor Herzl had said, no, this is enough. So he formed was one of the instigators of the Zionist organisation that started to encourage Jewish people to go back to the land of, what it's called, P. I will never call it P. It's always been Israel as far as I'm concerned. And even before that, then Ben Yehuda, when he was born and raised up in Belarus, what is now Belarus, he was the one that resurrected the Hebrew language. So you can see that God had his timing and his plans for the restoration of Israel and the restoration of the Jews to the land. And that's right from 33 to the very end of the book. But 33 to 46, this was the return of the land. And this is what Sue was doing in Russia for 4 months, working with the Jewish agency in Tula, which is an industrial city south of Moscow. And the Jewish community there once again just fell in love with her. And when she had to go to another city, Rosh Hashanah occurred, and the leaders of the community insisted that she come back and be the guest of honour for Rosh Hashanah in Tula that year. And that's why I'm going to hammer Rosh in a minute, all right? So then it goes to, they return to the land, 33 to 46. 37 is the Valley of the Dry Bones, and that's generally after World War II, when the nation came to life with the sinews and the flesh and the muscles being put on the bones. And that was marked by the 14th of May 1948. And then you've got 38 and 39. It should be 38 and 39, but it doesn't matter. We know. And then this is this particular war. And in 40 to 48 is the Millennial Kingdom. So there it is right through from the 6th century right through to the coming Millennial Kingdom. And one of the first verse in 38:1 and 2, now the word of the Lord came to me. This is Ezekiel saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. And the worst translation error they could ever have made when they did the New King James and a couple of other major translations. They said, Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal, and that's total and utter nonsense. And I'm going to show you why it's total and utter nonsense. And I told you last week that of my 71 English translations of the scriptures, at least 39 of those translations get it right. They are correct, over half, which I'm thrilled about. It should read, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. That is the correct translation. And I'll tell you why it's a correct translation, because we go to Noah and his sons after the flood, and in Genesis 9, God cuts a covenant with Noah. He'll never flood the place again, and he puts a rainbow in the sky. So every time you and I see a rainbow, that's a guarantee of the covenant between Noah and God. But have a look at his children. You have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Japheth are the Gentiles, the Goyim, and I'm assuming that most of you here are part of descendants from Japheth. And Ham is Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. And there's Shem, and that is the ancestor of Abraham. From the loins of Abraham, we got the Jewish race and the Israelite nation. But have a look at the first of Shem's sons, Elam. Elam, and that's the ancient name of a country we now call Iran. And a lot of people think, well, Iran hates Israel. No, Persian people don't hate Israel. It's the wicked government of Iran that hates Israel. And they are even tougher on their own people than they are on anyone else. And they have the Revolutionary Guard Corps that if any Persian steps out of place, they execute them, jail them and execute them. There was a lovely young girl who was executed in Iran. My wife was very upset about this about 2 or 3 weeks ago for simply refusing to wear a hijab in public. And they execute her. Give me a break. But isn't it funny how Elam there is one of the 5 nations that's named in this particular war? You've got Gomer under Japheth, and also, what's the second son down? Magog. Then you've got Madar, Yavin, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Ham is Cush, Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Put, Libya, Canaan, the Canaanite tribes of that Joshua defeated. And then with Shem, you've got Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. I can't find a Rosh anywhere. Do you understand? I can't find a Rosh anywhere. And let me tell you what John MacArthur says in his translation and his study book. And he actually says the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, from the wrong translation, he's having to use the NKG in this one. But he says here, this is wrong, and it should be translated the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, because Rosh, more than 600 times in the Hebrew Old Testament, the Tanakh, is an adjective. Not only not a noun, it is not a descriptor of an ethnic entity. Do you understand? There are no people groups called Rosh. Never have been, never will be. And you know what? When we started at Morris Effort, and the Jewish people started to, be friendly towards us and invite us round to their homes, and then we got invited to a joyous event that's held once a year called Rosh Hashanah. And what's Rosh Hashanah? It's the Jewish New Year. Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Do you understand? That's what Rosh is in Hebrew. And there has never been an ethnic group anywhere called Rosh. And I don't care which one of your YouTubers maintains that. There is no basis to that whatsoever. There we had before the sons of Noah through Ham, Shem, and Japheth. No Rosh there. No Rosh there. It's an absolute disgrace. Anyway, I'll calm down and we'll keep going. Yeah. I mean, I fight to the death to tell you what the Bible says, not what I want it to say. Do you see? It's the truth. And you know what? I just can't get over what some of these people get away with. But anyway, we'll keep going. Now, part 2 of the Magog War, which is the birth of Antichrist, and it's also the initiation of the 10 kingdom, 10 region war that world government that evolves from this. You guys haven't got on the computer the Club of Rome map of the 10 regions? We have or haven't? Okay. I just want to show you this because we have guests here who may not be overly aware of what has been in play since the 1950s, when the Club of Rome decided to divide the world into 10 regions. And I'm sure they're not biblical scholars, but as we'll get into this particular chapter 39, it doesn't matter if it's not critical. It's coming? All right. It's not a steam engine. We've got so many things over the years that we've got stored away. That is the Club of Rome's 10-nation world government. And you might think, well, that's just their plan. No, it's not just their plan. They've been practicing this since the 50s using what? And I can guarantee, I'll bet you $1,000 not one of you can give me an answer. It's the World Football Federation. And what do they call soccer? The World Game. Do you understand? And so they have had an administration of football in each of those 10 regions. Do you understand? And they've been refining the way that they are going to work in the future. They don't know anything about the Gog-Magog war. They're not biblical scholars. But they are moved to do that through God, who wants it to be there so that that will usher forth the Antichrist, because he is the little horn of Daniel 7 who whittles up through the administration and becomes the big cheese. And so this one here is the birth of the Antichrist. The whole point, and we were going nicely along in Revelation, and then we finished 11. And before I wanted to get to 12, because that's where there is the dragon standing before the woman in the spiritual realm. And that woman basically is Leah, who is Jacob's first wife. And she has, she's dressed in the sun, she's standing on the moon, she has a garland of 12 stars, and the dragon is standing before her. And I thought, no, I need to insert the Gog-Magog war, because that is proof positive that from the Garden of Eden, Satan has had a war against the woman and her offspring. The whole point of inserting this passage from Ezekiel, that is the Gog-Magog war, is to describe this event as paving the way for the Antichrist to be revealed in God's timing. And the famous prophecy passage in Daniel 9 verses 24 to 27 as to the 490 years of history given to Israel from Gabriel to Daniel. And it is both to define that which pertains to this prophecy and God's unbreakable will to fulfill all promises in the covenants contained within the scripture. And in our home Bible study every fortnight, we're doing the 8 covenants of the Bible. 5 of them are to Israel. And so the Abrahamic covenant guarantees that he will be the father of a great nation, that his descendants will be multitudinous, and that his name will be great. Added to this, there is the blessing to those who bless Israel and a severe warning to those who curse Israel. And I'll give you, and look at me right now, I'm a living example of someone who has blessed Israel and been blessed by Israel. Do you understand? And that's as true as anything can be. And so to all 3 patriarchs, and for our guests, Abraham, Yitzhak and Yaakov, God gave the unbreakable land covenant, which will finally be reality in the Millennial Kingdom. And the Davidic covenant promised an eternal house and throne for the descendant of David, who will be the Messiah of Israel in that kingdom. And the new covenant in Jeremiah 31, 33 and 34 is the final blessing to Israel to be revealed in that kingdom. Because of all of these covenants and promises, there has to be a fulfillment of all prophecy And the message today is the second installment of the greatest war so far that challenges the existence of the nation of Israel. Yet God himself promised that he will guarantee victory for Israel and annihilation for her enemies. However, the final victory will incur several setbacks through the fulfillment of prophecies, such as the underlying theme of God's unbreakable promises to Israel, that he will finally vanquish his enemies of Israel, and as they are also his enemies. If you're against Israel, you're against the God of Israel. And you and I owe our faith to the God of Israel. And the greatest enemy yet to be revealed is the Antichrist, who will be made visible to the whole world as it recovers from the worldwide devastation caused by God's judgment on the world following this war. And the in-depth results of this judgment will come in chapters 12 and 13 of Revelation, which we will get back to next week. And Ezekiel 39, so it's 1 to 29, and it's the English Standard Version. And there is in the Hebrew literature a device called the law of recurrence. And I don't know how many of you have read this or heard of it or whatever. It's called The Footsteps of the Messiah. It's a book on prophecy written by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, a Messianic Jew. He and his family were refuseniks in Russia, and they finally got to New York, and he's a runt of a man. He's about that tall, and because Andy Woods had to bend over double to look and talk to him face to face. He's a 7-foot basketball player if you don't know him. But anyway, he got to New York, and he came under the influence of a Messianic rabbi, got him saved, went home, said to Dad, I believe that Jesus is the Messiah. The dad beat him up badly and kicked him out of the house. That's a frequent occurrence. Not general, but there is something about leaving Orthodox Judaism and accepting Jesus. Mind you, I've had lots of Catholic friends that get the same treatment when they leave the Catholic Church and come to a church like ours. So anyway, 39 verse 1, and you son of man, that son of man, there's only two people in the Bible, and one in the Old Testament, Ezekiel, and one in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, which is Jesus, Yeshua. And that is it's not a name. The word Adam, or son of man, is Adam in the Hebrew, and it's in Strong's number 120. And it's not a name, it's a descriptive. And it means red or ruddy. And so the dust that God gathered up and created the physical body of Adam was red and ruddy. And that's why it's called that. And it becomes a synecdoche for man or mankind. But do you know what? When I was a new believer 30 years ago working in the mines up in the goldfields out in the Great Victorian Desert, I was surrounded by geologists, right? And I used to read up a bit of geology. And apparently, according to a clique of geologists, they maintain that the desert regions of Western Australia is the oldest existing land formation, going back as far as you can, maybe to the Great Flood. And I used to walk around there, and I was walking on red dust everywhere. Gets in your car, gets in your suspension, gets everywhere, ruins everything. But I remembered that the name, or Adam's name, actually is a descriptive meaning red and ruddy, which is the dust that he was made of. And so prophesy against Gog and say, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And for people who weren't here last week, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Gog, by the way, is not a person. He's the high-ranking evil angel who influences the leader of the country that he's over. And to prove that, I'm going to give you a verse out of Daniel 10:13. And it says this, and this is when Gabriel was sent by God down to Daniel to give him the second prophecy in Daniel in chapter 10. And Gabriel said this, the prince of the kingdom of Persia, this is an angel, not a person, because Gabriel is an angel and he stands in the presence of God. And the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days. So this angel is higher in rank than Gabriel, and therefore Gabriel could not get to Daniel for 21 days. But look at this. But Michael, one of the chief princes, and what is Michael? What is his rank in heaven? He's an archangel. So he's a chief prince. Do you understand? And the ranking in heaven is seraphim that above the throne of God, the 4 cherubim that are before the throne of God, and they are sent sometimes to the earth on errands for God amongst humanity. And they were there in Jerusalem in the 7th century when the glory of God was removed from the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. And so then you have archangels, then you have principal angels, princes, and then you have the great cohort of the uncountable cohort of angels. And so Michael, one of the chief princes, now that's in English. In the Hebrew, it's a structure. It's whenever you have a numeral or a number in a phrase that applies to someone, it is not one of the chief princes. It's an ordinal structure in the Hebrew, and it means he's the first among the archangels. So he is the head of the chief princes and the archangels. And that is why in Jude 9, remember we did Jude 9 a while ago, and in Jude 9, Satan was trying to dig up Moses' body on Mount Nebo, and God sent Jude to him to stop that. And so he was given that privilege and that authority to debate with Satan about the body of Moses. But he couldn't fight Satan, not yet. 12 is really interesting. Chapter 12 is very interesting. But he said, the Lord rebuke you. So Satan gave up the digging exercise. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia. So there's an insight into the ranking of angels just in Daniel. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, it's perfectly correct to place Gog in the realm of the fallen, rebellious angels who fell from heaven after iniquity was found in Lucifer's heart. And in chapter 12, it says the red dragon swept with his tail a third of the angels to the earth. And that means maybe he won a third of the angels to his side when he was slandering God in heaven. The archangel Michael is the chief prince over Israel. So Gog, as chief prince, is the archangel over Magog. Magog means the land of Gog, which is modern-day Russia. And the first, I've done that one and that one. Have you got the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Eric? Okay, that's better. Can you move it up? Yeah, up, stop there. Whoop, that's even better. Right, so we've got Lebanon and below there Israel. That's the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And where you have, there's a little indent in the southeastern coastline of the Black Sea. What you've got there is Riz and Gerison. But what was there initially on the left-hand side was Meshech and Tubal in the 6th century. And the problem for the people of Meshech and Tubal was that not only they were there, but also the Scythians were there. And they were the dominant nomadic tribe when Ezekiel was instructed to prophesy in the 6th century BC from exile in Babylon. And Meshech and Tubal are the regions of northern Turkey where the Scythians, the Russians, were dominant from the 7th century BC to the 5th century, when Darius I sent them packing in 513 BC, using 35,000 crack Persian soldiers. And they chased them to the east and further right round to the top of the Black Sea to the Volga River. And the Scythians, who were perennially nomads on horseback, and therefore they had no infrastructure to dismantle and transport. And their preferred battle tactic was to retreat and use lightning skirmishes to the extent that their pursuers would eventually give up. And remember, I told you that the Scythians are the forebears of the modern Russians. And remember I told you last week, when Napoleon Bonaparte was attempting to take over Russia and become emperor of all Russia, then he went into Russia with an army of 400,000 troops. And he was expecting to go to battle with the Russian army, but what did they do? They retreated and skirmished with the French army. And they got so far back that they even set fire to Moscow. And when Bonaparte got there, the city was on fire and there was nothing to capture. And it was by this time the Russian winter, and you don't want to be in a Russian winter. When we were in I've been to Russia twice, my wife's been to Russia 4 times, and we visited Australians who lived there. And one of the ladies was saying to my wife that in the winter, if you are silly enough to let your hair, a tuft of your hair, come out from under your cap, you can snap it off. It's that cold. And what you don't dare do is to blink if your eyes are moist, because the eyelids will jam together with frost. It's that cold. It's that, and I said, how do you do it? You know, anything under, 70 degrees and I'm upset. But that's how they did it. And so in verse 2, I will turn you, this is what God is saying, this, and he's talking to Gog, this angel, and I will turn you about and drive you forward and bring you up from the uttermost parts of the north, and that has to be Russia. If you go straight north of Jerusalem, you get Moscow, and lead you against, now here's something really interesting, the mountains of Israel. And we've got a map here, a topographical map, can we sort of emphasise the left one or not? Or is it just like that? So that's a topographical map of Israel as it is today. And up here in the top, that's Lebanon. Then you've got the Sea of Galilee and the Galilee in general. And then you start in southern general, the mountains of Israel. And they go all the way down to Hebron and a bit further until you get to the Negev desert. But have a look at the border that is around the mountains of Israel at that time. And Arnold Fruchtenbaum, the author of that prophecy book, makes a very interesting comment on this particular verse. He says the 1948 War of Independence established the national reality of a restored Israel, but with a precarious landholding, specifically without the West Bank, which holds the mountains of Israel from Jenin in the Galilee. So that red border surrounding the mountains there before 67 was governed by Jordan. And it's very interesting because just look here. We come to 1967 and the Six-Day War. And hey presto, Israel now has control of the mountains of Israel, allowing the statement 2,600 years ago through Ezekiel that Gog and the invading army will fall on the mountains of Israel, not Jordan. Do you understand? Everything that happens, we think, oh, well, there's a war and there's the next thing, and then we go on to the next thing. No, God is moving the chess pieces on his board every time, and it will end up in the Millennial Kingdom, and I don't think that's very far away. So, verse 3, and then I will strike your bow from your left hand, and I will make your arrows drop out of your right hand. Now, this is Ezekiel's technology from the 6th century BC. And bow there in the Hebrew is kesheth, and it means a launcher. And obviously a bow launches an arrow. But if we're talking modern technology, it could also possibly be a rocket launcher that is being mentioned here. And haven't we seen far too many of those things on the news in the last 2 or 3 weeks? And an arrow, and that's chetz in the Hebrew, it's a piercer, it's a missile and an arrow, and it's possibly a battlefield tactical nuclear warhead. And that never occurred to me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, until Putin is threatening Ukraine with these battlefield nukes, which do massive damage but on a limited scale. And in verse 14 it says, you shall fall on the mountains of Israel, you and all your hordes, and notice this, and the peoples who are with you. And the you here is the human officer leading this invasion, but the spiritual influence is God, through Gog, the chief prince over Russia. And I will give you to the birds of prey of every sort and to the beasts of the field to be devoured, carrion birds and wild animals. And you shall fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares Adonai Elohim. Now please take the next verse, verse 6, very carefully, because it describes the total destruction not only of Russia, but Iran, Turkey, Libya, ancient Put, which is the Maghreb, the Islamic north coast, from Egypt to Morocco, and Black Africa, south of Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan. They were the 5 nations in this confederation. So they're totally and utterly destroyed by God's judgment upon them for attacking Israel. And these specifically are the hordes of God's army, those named nations, because they are identified by ethnicity according to the table of nations recording in Genesis, or Bereshit is for our guests, in chapters 10 and 11. But there is another group called the many peoples with you. And I made a point in last week of the Jewish people over the period of time out of the diaspora. They were in among the peoples in the diaspora. Then they were called out of the peoples. That's the Goyim nations of the world. And so they are the many peoples with you. And these, in my opinion, will be the volunteer mercenaries who will flood Syria to the north of Israel as the Magog Confederation assembles to the north of the Golan. Do you remember, do you remember when that guy al-Baghdadi went into Syria and Iraq and announced the revival of the caliphate? Do you remember that? That's a bad period of Middle East history. And tens of thousands of Muslims left their home countries, including Australia, to join that brief moment of Islamic euphoria. Can you then imagine, given what is happening worldwide with Muslim communities in virtually every nation on the earth, within every continent on the earth? And haven't we seen that on the news in the last week? All of these pro-Palestinian riots everywhere, every town, every city. My wife handed me her phone this morning when we were having breakfast in bed, and we were just laughing so much because we come from New Zealand, and I've been here a long time, but there was a group of pro-Palestinian people, I'm going to call them people, but anyway, and they went into the middle of Auckland to protest for Palestine. The big problem was about 200 Maoris went to the same place, stood in front of them and did the haka. And they all took off. Mind you, with 200 Maoris doing the haka in front of me, I probably would take off too. Most of my best friends over there were Maoris. They just laugh a minute, you know. One of them borrowed my brand spanking new Honda to go to a funeral, and I wasn't sharp enough to think. And I said, so how long are you going to be? He said, 3 days, Stewie, 3 days, honest. 2 weeks later, I was still trying to find out where he was. And he had gone up to the Coromandel to the funeral, then he had gone up to Auckland and got all his mates and was driving around Auckland in this brand new car to show off it to all his mates, you see. Didn't tell him that it wasn't his, but anyway. But you just got to laugh, you know, they do that all the time. And here is verse 6. Here is verse 6. This is God speaking, Elohim talking. I will send fire, that is judgment, on Magog, Russia, and on those who dwell securely. And that's that Hebrew word batak again. And it's either good under the protection of God, it's safe under the protection of God. But in the negative connotation, it's also arrogance and false confidence. And these people, the Goyim in the coastlands, are certainly guilty of that, because they thought that confederation and that number of mercenaries there coming down into Israel, it was a sure thing that they would win. But they didn't reckon with the God of Israel. And the Goyim, they shall know that I am the Lord. Now, I'll give you an explanation. Chuck Missler, when he taught me that verse time and time again, said, listen, we don't know where the coastlands are. They are sometimes called the coastlands, or the coastlands of the isles, or the coastlands of the seas. And a lot of speculation, was it Sardinia, Cyprus, Crete, whatever, or was it the coastal around the Mediterranean? They argued backwards and forward. All they needed to do was just to read Isaiah. Scripture will always explain Scripture. And one of the things I got taught by a Jewish guy is that there is a thing called a law of recurrence in literary devices. And Isaiah 11 and 12 give you a perfect example of this. And verse 11 is this: in that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people. So when did he regather them the first time? After Babylon. Do you understand? Under Ezra and Nehemiah. He regathered them the first time from Mesopotamia. And there was about between 1.5 and 3 million living between the two rivers in Babylon, in the verdant landscape. And when they were offered the opportunity to go home, out of about 1.5 million, 39,000 did. 39,000 did. It was paradise. And they didn't want to go back to the Judean high country and work hard. So this is the second time, and this is from the diaspora that has been there for 1900 years. So a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, now listen carefully, from Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, which is Mesopotamia, and from Hamath, and from where? The coastlands of the sea. And everyone goes, oh, we don't know who that is. Well, let a Jewish literary device tell you where it is. Verse 12. And this was the one that spurred on the organisation that my wife was part of and lived in Russia with the Olim and the Jewish Agency. Verse 12. And he, God, will raise a signal or a banner or an ensign. He's going to show the whole world what he's doing the second time for the nations, and will assemble the banished of what? This is interesting to me. First Israel, the northern kingdom, and gather the dispersed of Judah. From the where? The four corners of the earth. So the coastlands of the sea are the four corners of the earth. And you go back to verse 6, and God is going to send fire on Magog and those who dwell, Betak, in arrogance and false confidence in the coastlands. That is, he's going to pour out devastation on the four corners of the earth. And the destruction there then leads the remaining Gentiles to come together and say, we've got to form a one world government and rebuild this place. And it finally made sense to me. It finally made sense to how many different countries and nations and everything else would come together and join in that one project. And you know, the other thing is, we know that the Antichrist, who's the little horn of Daniel 7, when he does this, he signs in Daniel 9:24 to 27, he signs a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, and for 3.5 years he protects them, and no one else can get near them, and the rest of the world is in disaster. And I used to ask Chuck, why on earth would the entire nations of the earth, under the tutelage of this little horn of Daniel 7, why would all of them sign a peace treaty with itsy bitsy tiny little Israel? And it's because of the devastation of this Magog war. Because they sort of got the hint that the God of Israel is not someone to go to war with. In Ezekiel 38, 21 and 23, this describes what he poured out on the four corners of the earth. And God says, I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares Adonai Elohim, and every man's sword will be against his brother with, listen to this, pestilence, bloodshed. I will enter into judgment with him, and I will rain upon him and his hordes. The hordes are the named ethnic nations that joined him, and the many peoples who are with him. See, there's three groups: Magog, the other nations, and the peoples, the mercenaries who are with them. And I will rain on them torrential rains, hailstones, fire, and burning sulphur. Boy, he's mad. You touch the apple of his eye and he gets mad. And so I will show my greatness in verse 23 and my holiness, and make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. And this is the prophetic verse pertaining to the subsequent events after this war, which God wins. Mind you, Israel didn't win it, God did, including the formation of the 10-region, 10-king world government, revealing of the Antichrist as the little horn of Daniel 7, the 7-year tribulation in 2 halves, the peace treaty, and the second advent of Messiah, and the 75-day interval, can't wait to teach you that, and the inauguration of the Millennial Kingdoms. And one of the things that he's going to rain down on these enemies of Israel all around the world are hailstones. You ever given any great thought to hailstones? I do. I even look at punctuation. And these hailstones are amazing, because these hailstones have been in storage for this event for thousands of years. To be pedantic, 4,000 years. And Job 38, 19 to 23, this is where God is speaking to Job rhetorically, because Job had been talking to Eliphaz, Bildad and Zophar, 3 of his mates, and they were telling everything that was wrong with him. Boy, don't you need Christian friends like that. And anyway, they were going all with warped theology all over the place. And finally in Job 38, God gets hold of Job and rips into him. And in verse 19 it says, "Where is the way to the dwelling of light?" Light is order in Hebrew, and it means joy, happiness, salvation, life, all the good things. "And where is the place of darkness, which is destruction, evil, Sheol?" And there's a total contrast between the two. And he's asking Job, where was the source of these things? And verse 20, "that you may take it to its territory and that you may discern the paths to its home. You know," and he's really getting at Job now, "for you were born then, and the number of your days is great," meaning you were thousands of years old. No, he wasn't. Verse 22, "Have you entered the storehouses of snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war, 4,000 years in the future?" So, Chuck Missler spoke to this worldwide judgment in a DVD that I bought donkeys years ago, probably 25 years ago, that a 100-pound hailstone that fell from height, hitting the earth from the ionosphere, would have the same effect as a 1 megaton nuclear device. And 7, "And my holy name I will make known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let my holy name be profaned anymore. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord." See, it's all about him. It always has been all about him. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's all about him. It starts with him and the book ends with him. "And my holy name I will make known in the midst of my people Israel," his national witness on this earth, "and I will not let my holy name be profaned anymore. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. And behold, it is coming, and it will be brought about, declares the Lord God." So he's speaking to Ezekiel 600 years before Jesus, and that is the day of which I have spoken. "Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and make fires of weapons, nuclear warheads, burn them possibly, shields and bucklers, bows and arrows, clubs and spears, and they will make fires of them for 7 years." I know. "So that they will not need to take wood out of the field." So what they do with these fallen missiles, they use something out of them. And it's speculation. I'm not going to teach it as fact, but it could be the nuclear head and take it and use it for energy for 7 years. And verse 11, "On that day I will give to Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of the travellers, east of the sea," that's the Dead Sea, "and the east of the Jordan. It will block the travellers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. It will be called the valley of Hamon Gog, the multitude of Gog." And I'm going to have to stop there because of everything else that we enjoyed today. But God won this battle for Israel. But because of this, he sent judgment down on the 4 corners of the earth, which generated a one world government, which brought forth the Daniel 7 individual, the little horn, who becomes an administrative person powerful enough to sign that treaty with Israel for 7 years. And then we now run into chapter 12 next week. Father, I do thank you for this time and this ability and this privilege to actually join together, Father, and examine your word so deeply, and examine your word in order that we may understand more clearly what's happening in the world today. And Father, we know that the time is coming towards us, Father, and that is even more a spur on us to make ourselves right with the Lord and to keep short actions with him, Father. And Father, it's time to really come together. It's time to understand the promises to Abraham in Genesis, Bereshit 12:1 and 3, that those who bless Israel will be blessed by him. And that's time that we thought about that. And this church has done it. We sent our pictures of the flags and everything we sent it to some people here and they sent it to Beersheba. And Beersheba was so amazed they sent it back to family they have here. And so Sue has been rushed all over the place because of what we did there. So this church stands with Israel. And so I ask you now, Father, that with everyone here, with all the health problems that those who are not here, I ask you to restore them, to bring them back to full health, Father. I also ask you, Father, to knit us together as one body, promoting your word, promoting your promises, promoting your prophecy, that everyone who doesn't know you yet, Lord, will come to strong faith in the God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim, and that we would know that one day we will be in his presence. And Father, I can't wait for that time. And I know that that time is coming. What is happening in Israel is the time clock of the last years. And Father, I ask you now for a blessing and safety of those who have come here today, Father. And as they go home and travel, watch over them, Father. And may they be your voice and your witness during the week to come. And all God's people said.